show, everyone, cruising along from one Harrison Ford movie to another. Join us, won't you? Let's get out of this turkey town and hit the road for the Ford Fiesta. I'm scruffy-looking Adam Witt.
And I'm Fortune and Glory Seeker Paul Preston. And I'm really excited today to cover American Graffiti. I think it's going to be a great show.
I'm not really interested in your opinion.
That's right. We've been doing this show long enough where now we finally get to a movie you've heard of. George Lucas's classic coming-of-age early 60s comedy, American Graffiti. Help us spread the word about the Lord's work we're doing here by commenting on articles, videos, and more. Subscribe where you can. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pandora, YouTube, and more. And then get ready for everything coming up on the show and all things we're up to at The Movie Guys by going to themovieguys.net and following us on @TheMovieGuys all over social media. We're everywhere. We're like Bob Falfa. We're mysteriously somewhere out in this town is The Movie Guys somewhere. Now, the plot to American Graffiti meanders, but we're going to sum it up for you anyway. But first, what's new in the world of Harrison Ford?
Oh, I'd be happy to tell you. First of all, we talked about The Staircase, this new TV series that he's going to do. Of course, it's not weird now that people do TV series. I still think it would be weird if Harrison Ford did. There's something about the movie star status of Ford and Denzel and Tom Cruise that just, I don't want to see do TV, but you know, that the line of quality, of course, blurs all over the place nowadays.
There's something about being a minor character in a Stallone movie too, but he's done that. So I mean, he's broken a lot of barriers here. I mean, he's done a Dolph Lundgren. I mean, now he can do a TV show.
Either way, he's out. The Staircase, which after we posted about this, someone responded about what The Staircase is. Remember, we said it was a movie where a guy's wife falls down the stairs and he's accused of her murder. It's like a fugitive, like Harrison Ford would be perfect in this.
There you go.
But apparently it's based on this Netflix show that I never watched. There's too many like true crime dramas out there, and the docuseries, there's tons of them. I can't keep up to where this...
Everybody's murdering somebody right
yeah,
now.
And Netflix, and Netflix is there.
I ought to kill you right now.
And so they did a series that covered this real life trial of the guy accused of murder, and then there's all sorts of layers getting revealed, of course, as they go along. Either way, Colin Firth is now going to do that show. Harrison Ford is not, so I guess he's just going to solely focus on Indiana Jones 5, which means this might actually be happening now.
So Karen's favorite actor replaced your favorite actor.
Exactly. Indiana Jones 5 may really be happening now. They not only have a director attached, but now another actor. You've heard, I think Harrison Ford could say, I'm doing it, as much as he wants.
It's been said every year.
Now, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is cast in the show from Fleabag, and of course, Adam, you'll know her from...
Solo!
Yeah.
A Han Solo castmate is appearing with Han Solo in in an Indiana Jones movie. That's for real, man. And that also probably means Solo 2's happening.
And Randy Couture has said The Expendables 4 will shoot this fall. Now, will Ford be in it? Will anyone else be in it? Apparently, that's the only news that anyone has about Expendables 4, is that Randy Couture said they're going to make it.
Who's left to bring into those movies? They plumbed every... Is Jeff Speakman? Has Jeff Speakman made an appearance
Tony
in one of those?
Jaa,
Mark
perhaps?
Singer?
Yeah. Martin Kove is free and he'll gladly do it, but Randy Couture, of course, is the guy that said, yeah, we're doing Expendables 4. I guess he's probably like, I need it. I could use it.
There's always a thing about the fifth build actor saying the next thing is happening. Like what's her face from Lebowski, Bunny Lebowski?
Tara Reid.
Tara Reid, who could use the work. Tara Reid, we know you need Lebowski 2 to happen.
And then, of course, as ever, I Googled Harrison Ford news just to see what would happen. And, there's the usual Daily Mail spotted him return. It's the interesting...
God bless the Daily Mail.
I love what they think is news. Like, he was spotted returning to his car. He was spotted arriving at tennis. He was spotted walking to his plane, arriving at
they were there.
Arriving at a studio in downtown LA, which not only does it crack me up, of course, because Daily Mail's just on that stuff, but also how come we're not seeing Harrison Ford? He's everywhere, apparently, according to walking to cars and in and out of buildings and planes. And
also, think of the daily intrigue of being a Daily Mail correspondent. I mean, you think of any spy movie where they're tailing, in Munich. Like, think of the Munich-style drama of following Harrison Ford that they're reporting around the corner. He's picked up some eggs, Like, get the photographer in here.
Did he get the dozen or the half dozen? Sometimes they cut them in half and do a half dozen you can purchase, but it's a convenience store, so he probably did that as opposed to a full dozen if you were in a grocery store, and they're figuring it all out.
I need a 12K photo. Zoom in, enhance.
Yeah, and it's always that too. Looking sharp, looking slim in a blah blah blah. This the dumbest.
In a belt. Last week was a belt, or 2 weeks ago was a belt, right?
Well, they were examining a belt from the '84. They had so little news on Ford. But this part's interesting because we've reported twice about him going into a bike shop. Again, we haven't reported it. We've reported the Daily Mail reported it. But now there's an end to all that.
That story comes to a close?
Yes.
So he dropped off his bike.
Ford biked from Tijuana to Cabo San Lucas on this bike. First of all, 78 years old. Biking from Tijuana to Cabo San. I have trouble going to the other side of Burbank and back on my bike on the Chandler bike path.
It's not the years, it's the mileage.
Remember when everybody said he was too old to do Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? What is that movie, 15 years old now?
Yeah.
I mean, I just watched Force Awakens last week, and I'm like, he's just so great in this movie.
Totally.
Like, is he too old to play Han Solo? No, never. No, it's Harrison Ford.
Yes.
He's never too old to do anything.
And he will Indiana Jones the hell out of that role. So for those of you who were sitting around the computer going, man, when will the movie guys tell me what he did with that bike?
Because he got the bike and to take it back or something. There was another story in there where
adjusting it or something. Yeah.
Well, now we realize why he needed some adjustments. Like, I'm going to need to ride this halfway across Mexico. Can you make sure it's it's greased up?
And of course, there's one more quick recurring show segment before we get to the recap, and that is this date in Ford history. April 7th, 1974, that's around the time that we're recording this episode on American Graffiti. The next movie we cover on the show, The Conversation, is released, and I'm really excited to get to that one. Only saw it once, probably went over my head. I was really young and happy to be older and ready to really absorb it the way Coppola meant me to check it out.
Oh, yeah, you're going to enjoy it. I mean, I've watched this movie a lot. Such a fascinating little artifact. Comes in between Godfather and Godfather 2. He just does this tiny little indie in San Francisco, like pure zoetrope style.
Yeah, and I think one of those that he made because Godfather was big. He was otherwise trying to make it since the 60s, I think. And then 2015, April 8th, Age of Adeline is released. Now, this is one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, right? Because I remember seeing the trailer, like, oh, Harrison Ford's in the movie. Then I realized he had a really small part. And then, for some reason, I never saw it.
Yeah, that's what started this whole conversation to begin with, is like, I can't believe at some point it became, I mean, of course, you and I, we saw every Harrison Ford movie that was released, ever. I mean, there's no reason to, I don't know, what was I, 10, 11-year-old should enjoy the Mosquito Coast, but I was there. Until sometime after Air Force One or something, that it just started dropping off. As we come to some of these anniversaries, I'm like, there was a movie called Age of Adeline and he was in it? Okay.
Yeah, over time it's like, oh, now I'm endeared to watching Paranoia with Gary Oldman. Like, those two re-teamed after Air Force One and we didn't go? What was wrong with me? So, yeah, so we're going to check that out.
So, finally, after 5 movies, we don't have to say, what the hell is American Graffiti? Although, we're still unclear what those two words together mean. But we'll do our best to figure that out with our patented Movie Guys Recapped. Paul, let's do it.
Where were you in 62? Asks the tagline for American Graffiti. While the movie never gets to the bottom of that mystery, it does tell us what Kurt, Steve, John, Terry, Lori, Debbie, and Carol were doing in 62. And that's cruising around Modesto, California in vintage hot rods.
The movie opens like a cannon that fires nostalgia with Rock Around the Clock and sets the tone for the entire movie, which will not stop playing oldie hits for 2 hours. On the last day of summer vacation, 4 high school friends meet up at Mel's Drive-In, which sets the standard for nostalgic roller skating waitresses.
In a movie about cars, the main characters are perfectly set up by their car of choice. Steve, played by Ron Howard, in a hot 58 Impala. Kurt, played by Richard Dreyfuss, arrives in an oddball French Citroën du Chevaux. John Milner, the town racing champion, played by Paul Lamont, arrives in the iconic 1932 Rat Rod Ford 5-window coupe. But no entrance defines their character as sharply as Charles Martin Smith's Terry the Toad, who arrives on a Vespa that he fails to take out of gear, sending him careening into a newspaper box.
The group are all on the precipice of adulthood. Kurt is heading off to college the next day, but he's not sure about it as he still looks up to Milner, who's more than happy being the big man around town. But Milner gets a warning of a challenge to his throne, a faster street racer who's looking to beat him in a drag race. The 1962 equivalent of, I can finish Overwatch quicker than you.
Is Overwatch a thing you can finish? I'm assuming. I don't know.
I don't know.
Steve's heading off to college, putting his relationship with his high school sweetheart, Lori, played by Laverne and Shirley's Cindy Williams, in an awkward position. A position he makes more awkward by telling her it would strengthen their relationship if he was able to freely sleep around with college freshmen. A relationship plan girls rarely come up with.
Steve and Lori head off to find more oldies at the source, a sock hop. But before he does, he gifts his prize 58 Impala to Terry to take care of while he's gone off to college. And so Terry sets off to cruise for babes in something they won't fall off of when he misses the clutch.
Rather than pushing his Citroen to the sock hop, Kurt tags along in Lori's car with Steve, but is distracted when American Graffiti, not satisfied with launching the careers of Richard Dreyfuss, Ron Howard, and Cindy Williams, adds the first screen appearance of Suzanne Summers. She turns and mouths, "I love you," to Kurt. At least that's what he sees as he sets out for the rest of the night looking for her. And maybe Pam Dauber, so this movie can cast every show for ABC's 1979 Tuesday night lineup.
But that's all prologue to what American Graffiti is all about. Cruisin'. Yeah, round and round the central strip of Modesto, showing off cars, gunning engines, pulling pranks, and having rolling conversations with other kids in their classic cars. It's a perfect representation of an early 60s subculture, so perfectly presented you'd never guess it was the first.
The stories of the four main characters cut back and forth in a series of vignettes tied together by hit song after hit song being played by rock DJ legend Wolfman Jack. A song starts in one car and continues in another as every topic about teen life in the 60s gets batted around, except venereal disease.
Milner tries to hit on some ladies in another car, trying to get one of them to cruise with him in his passenger seat, only to accidentally get saddled with babysitting one of their kid sisters, Carol, played by One Day at a Time's Mackenzie Phillips, introducing another famous TV actor to the cast.
Meanwhile, the movie shifts to the sock hop where a now crumbling Steve and Lori are forced to pretend they're happy homecoming king and queen in a dance surrounded by onlookers who can't hear the devastating breakup conversation they're having, in one of the movie's standout dramatic contrasts.
Meanwhile, Kurt joins a street gang. That's right. The Pharaohs rip off the arcade belonging to Mr. Gordon, who recently gave Kurt a scholarship for college. Kurt is able to distract them while the Pharaohs go on their stealing binge, ingratiating him to the gang. Meanwhile,
after a total drag racing fail, Terry one-ups his doofiness by getting Steve's car stolen, allegedly. But this predicament puts him and a girl he ends up with, the flirtatious and loony Debbie, in the woods, making their way back to the strip. Debbie brings up a story of the goat killer, who, despite how much the name terrifies Terry, is not the greatest killer of all time.
By now, in any lesser movie, you'd be missing a plot. But American Graffiti doubles down on, oh well, how about we just do this next? By then having Kurt head out to Wolfman Jack's radio station to ask him to read a message on the air to the blonde he saw. Wolfman pulls a Mike and Dave need wedding dates and pretends to be someone he's not, an employee of the Wolfman. Turns out he is the Wolfman and reads the note anyway.
Before Richard Dreyfuss can say, "What about Bob?" along comes who the movie is really about. Harrison Ford as hotshot street racer Bob Falfa.
Hey, you know a guy around here with a piss yellow deuce coupe? Supposed to be hot stuff?
What, do you mean John Milner? Hey, nobody could beat him, man. He's got the fastest...
I ain't nobody, dork.
Who takes advantage of the rift between Steve and Lori and starts to cruise with Lori, even serenading her, leading to another Harrison Ford career first, and maybe only, on-screen song.
Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger. You will see a stranger.
Well, you got the little witness where he kind of sings along with Sam Cooke. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, you're right. You're right. We've got 2 Harrison Ford songs. And you know what? In the 10 we haven't seen...
Hey, there might be more coming.
I'm wondering, Age of Adeline? Maybe he just comes in, sings a song, and leaves like Bobby Darin. It's a special impersonation. Terry eventually finds Steve's car and, in an attempt to get it back, gets pummeled by a couple of hoods. But Milner suddenly appears and beats the assailant back, right before he finally takes his race with Bob Falfa.
Hey, you're supposed to be the fastest thing in the valley, man, but that can't be your car. It must be your mama's car. I'm sort of embarrassed to be this close to you. Color your car there, man. What's that supposed to be? Sort of a cross between piss yellow and puke green, ain't it?
And all the plot lines come together during the Falfa and the Furious finale, as Milner races Falfa, sending the upstart careening off the road and flipping his car. Milner now doubts his future in being the local speed demon. Kurt doubts being Milner as a viable future and decides to go to college after all. Steve, however, doubts his plan to leave Laurie when he realizes there's a Harrison Ford and Modesto scoping for babes. The movie takes a famously grim turn as the final credits summarize what happened to each of them.
There were 7 boys from Texas, rode off to fight a war.
No, wait, no, not that song again, okay.
But we all know it was on-screen text that lets us know that Bluto became a senator and Niedermeyer was killed in Vietnam by his own troops. And that's American Graffiti. Yeah, pretty sure
I just want to say this time, I'm going to seem like a really smart guy. I just did a lot of research. I just don't know all these things. All right, so the year was 1973 when the film was released. Budget of, and this is, of course, one of the biggest facts about this movie you'll ever find.
Right.
Budget of $777,000. Box office take of $140 million. Wow. And that goes over $200 million once you throw in video sales, which had 3 or 4 different spots along the way. I think twice it was released on VHS and then once on, or then DVD and then Blu-ray as well. So,
and soundtrack sales. People weren't, even though there were famous soundtracks like The Graduate, they weren't pulling in like Graffiti money. Like this is a huge.
And one of the things I thought was interesting and how, like now it just seems like forever ago. You watch the scenes from the early 60s like that and you go, this is like forever ago. But back then it was like 9 years. But it already
recent nostalgia.
Yeah, it had changed so much.
It's a true and also look at what had happened between 1963 and 1973. You know, the Vietnam War, and that's what all the serious movies are being made about. Coming home and all these very serious takes and nothing for the kids, nothing fun. It's very interesting that the nostalgia is so recent, which is radical. Nobody done anything like this.
Yeah, Lucas was 27 when he got the green light to make this movie. So he was, like it's funny for a 27-year-old to be nostalgic, but he did it, and it's very successful.
But to just see the market, the audience for this, and this is his life we're looking at too, and it's spectacular. But this type of showcase of cars, maybe there was hot rod movies in the 50s, but those are trashy. These much like Easy Rider, this was kind of a Corman trope that was used for drive-ins, hot rods to hell. But, to take that genre and apply all this recent nostalgia for a generation that was yearning for it after Vietnam, really hurting in terms of the feel-goods, this movie's radical.
Yeah,
very radical.
You watch the Beatles change from 64 to 71, and radically, speaking that word.
Yeah.
So he sets it, he's like, before JFK, before Nam, all that, we're going back to like the last innocent year.
Yep.
Right. And that's the tagline, where were you in 62? And of course, it's on that great Mort Drucker poster. I know you're a big fan and have brought him up before.
Yeah, I brought up Jack Davis. Mort Drucker's another one.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, the Mad Magazine guys. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And this movie is made for a Jack Davis or Mort Drucker a cartoon because it's all vignettes. It's all little skits throughout the whole thing that happened to add up. This was the Pulp Fiction of its time. Nobody had seen anything like this on any level that it's playing tens. The Wolfman Jack, that type of nostalgia, or the idea that there was a station that an entire town never turned off. You'd turn off the car and then you'd hear it played somewhere else, all out in the world. The fractured narrative of this, which is what made the studio want to shelf it. Because who could make sense of this movie? That's what the studio said. This is not done in any traditional way. And when you watch this, it's a foregone conclusion that American Graffiti is an American classic and this great movie. But this is like a European art film in how it just does not give about your narrative structure.
All right, I'm going to deep dive on all that stuff in just a sec, but I want to ask you, as I don't remember the first time I saw this movie. I remember the most, until just now, the most recent time I saw it, which was in a friend's backyard projected onto a sheet with a...
Oh, okay.
But I don't remember the first time I saw it. Do you? Because it predates us being regular moviegoers, clearly.
Even as a young George Lucas fan, because of Star Wars, and I wanted to see all the stuff he'd done, I saw THX 1138 before I saw this movie because they aired that on TV. Yeah. I don't know why. It was shortly after the success of Star Wars. They were just as a Sunday night movie, and it was George Lucas, Star Wars. Stay up on the Sunday night, CBS Sunday night movie and watch George Lucas's George Lucas. And I watched the whole thing, and I couldn't make sense of what one George Lucas had to do with this George Lucas.
So he comes out of THX 1138 with Coppola telling him, he should write a script that appeals to mainstream audiences. And
right,
because we have this heaviness. Yeah.
THX is impenetrable. I mean, he made a Kubrick movie before he made the most profitable movie of all time, which is this, and before he made Star Wars, which is incredible.
Yeah, so the nostalgia is I want to document the way that we used to pick up girls, which wasn't too long ago, but may get lost because of how much society had already shifted.
Yeah.
And so the Coppola's like, I'm in. So his clout adds another $175,000 to an already small budget, but makes it bigger.
Because this was very recently Francis Ford Coppola of The Godfather.
Well, we just have to talk about this 70s genius incest that went on.
Right.
Every genius worked with all the other geniuses back then. And there's plenty of books and docs I need to see to dive deeper into this because it's so great.
You do.
I know. But Lucas, okay, so what I read, Lucas worked for 4 years on Apocalypse Now, developing it with John Milius, and at one point was scheduled to direct. He got Gary Kurtz scouting locations. He was going to shoot.
Yes.
George Lucas was going to do this.
George Lucas
was going to do the following. He had these plans. Shoot Apocalypse Now, cinema verite, using 16mm cameras, and real soldiers while the war was going on. That's what he was going to shoot in the early 70s.
George Lucas, radical.
He seems not that radical, but he had that in mind, before he got onto his own stuff.
And that version of Apocalypse Now, I believe, can be seen in the Vietnam sequence of More American Graffiti. He did get to do what he intended to, but on a much smaller scale.
And then, of course, back to the genius incest. Coppola needs post-production money for Apocalypse Now, and he eventually makes it. Who gives it to him? Lucas, because he's got Star Wars money.
Right,
so
he's got Star Wars money.
These guys just all working together is just amazing. Lucas also turned down Tommy and Hair. He was offered both to make his own projects. And THX got him $10,000 from United Artists to develop the script for American Graffiti when THX played at Cannes. And he gave $10,000 to a guy to work on the script, but he changed it too much from his original childhood vision. He kind of turned it into more of a 70s exploitation flick with extremes and all the different levels of sex and violence. He fired the guy, whipped out a draft in 3 weeks, and he had each song being a backdrop to the scene, and that's, of course, stuck through to the final script, which I think is very cool. You can kind of just hear songs end right when scenes do.
Incredible.
And that's when United Artists thought the songs would make it too expensive, so they passed on it. And Star Wars. Dummies! And then United Artists, of course, not around anymore. Oops.
Yeah, well, that would be United Artists would be put out of business by Heaven's Gate very sure within 5 years of this, right?
And it was the music costs scared off a lot of the financiers, and they actually, at one point, how bad would this have been, wanted to get an orchestra to create sound-alike tracks to the 60s tunes. They're like just generic rock and roll music. It just would not have worked.
Missing the point, of course.
Yeah.
That's another classic note that's missing the point.
Well, so it gets turned down by MGM, Paramount, 20th Century Fox, and Columbia. American International Pictures, George Corman that you mentioned.
Roger Corman.
I'm sorry, George Corman. George the boxer, George Corman. Roger Corman and Samuel Z. Arkoff. We're busy making Poe adaptations and beach party movies, so they thought the film didn't have enough violence or sex to suit their studio.
That is one of the great twists on the genre of a hot rod movie. Is there is one car crash in the movie? I can absolutely guarantee Sam Z. Arkoff's like, what?
We made Thunder Alley. Yeah, exactly.
When Ron Howard directed his first movie, Eat My Dust for Corman, Corman's like, I just need 35 car crashes, and he didn't care what the plot was. He's like, give me 35 car crashes. Okay, all right, so.
But eventually, when Universal comes in, they're the ones who, you see the logo at the top of the film. They save the project, sort of. They are meddling as well, but they give the monetary packages, which secured the songs from everyone, except RCA. RCA said no, and so that's why you don't hear any Elvis in the movie.
The last time I watched this at the New Beverly, which was the best way to do it with a crowd, I never realized how hilarious this movie was until I actually saw it with the crowd. The first time I watched it, I could basically have been unaware that it was a comedy because, some of these bits build and moments and stuff that you can miss it, I think, on video.
And many are a flyby. So Universal, like I said, gave Lucas total control on a strict budget. He was told by some execs that they thought American Graffiti was an Italian film about feet. This is a fact. Which I believe, because they're stupid. And he had to fight for the title over things like Another Slow Night in Modesto, which was an original early title you might have heard of. I'd heard of that before. And some crew members were paid in screen credit. I'd like to hear from them to see if that was a fact or not. But apparently, that's why we have like a longer title at the end. Like up till now, it was all just the big names at the beginning of the movie, then the end, and you're out. And now we start seeing credits at the end of American Graffiti till where now, you watch WandaVision and there's 10 years of credits.
Lucas would have to fight for no opening credits on Star Wars on the next movie, too. So
speaking of which, this is his only film that he directed without a crawl. THX had one as well. And so American Graffiti's the only one without an opening crawl.
Well, how great does it come out of the gate in this movie? I mean, you're sitting down, you don't know what you're about to watch in 1973. The Pulp Fiction style, the radio tuning dial, and kicking in that 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock rock. I mean, it's just it's such a triumphant, and the movie just never stops either. I love Terry the Toad's introduction with the scooter. Each of them each of them's defined by their mode of transportation.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. The cars define the characters, and then the characters define Lucas. Each one of them is a different point in his own life. He was the nerd. Yeah. He said he was popular. He was the greaser. He did all these different things.
Right. It's the 4 George Lucases.
Yeah, and you talk about that, that opening entrance of Toad. That's one of the things the small budget gave them. They didn't want to reshoot. It was an error, but they're like, this is great. He screwed up. He was supposed to stop. He didn't. He plowed into the things, and they're like, keep rolling. Ron Howard, to his critic, kind of looks over his shoulder at it, turns back around. I'm like, because he could have gone, whoa, cut, or something like. Right. Points to him for staying in it because they
stayed in character.
Got a very fun. And I guess Carol was not supposed to be hit in the face with the water balloon. The fact that she did and just had that crazy laugh all naturally, And so there's always the gives and the takes with indie film. Like those two things were errors that they're like, we're going to keep them because it's better than shooting again. He went with the documentary feel that works so great in this after he couldn't afford CinemaScope. So good thing we didn't get huge CinemaScope and have a Godfather-looking movie. Instead, we get this.
This feels like a documentary shot on the streets of Modesto. This movie feels like it was shot in 63. It's really, sometimes you have to struggle to remember, 1973 is when people are watching this. All this nostalgia and all this cinema newness.
Yeah, well, you got 2 cameras set up on each of the players in these drives down the street when they're cruising. So he saved money there. He got both reactions in the one shot with the 2 cameras going. And, after a while, they worked up to where they could do that setup quickly and save money there. So now this indie film setbacks. Paul LeMat, who plays John, went to the hospital with an allergic reaction to walnuts. I don't know if that's an indie film setback, but it's just the kind of thing that would happen on an indie film.
They're shooting all nights.
And in sequence. So when they're tired at the end of the movie, they're tired.
Wow.
When it's been a whole night and they're like, bye, Kurt, they're wiped. Yeah. And ironically, Lucas missed his own high school reunion because he made this film.
Oh my God. Hilarious.
There's some other things, like one actor set fire to Lucas's hotel room. I guess there was an accident that happened. Paul LeMat threw Richard Dreyfuss in a swimming pool and ended up gashing his head the day before he had a lot of close-ups. So they had to handle that. But my favorite thing is a Ford thing, of course. Let's get back to the
topic at hand.
The show here that we're talking about. Harrison Ford and Paul LeMat and Bo Hopkins were drunk most nights and conducted climbing competitions to the top of the local Holiday Inn sign.
You gonna stop acting like a lunatic?
And then eventually, Ford was kicked out of that Holiday Inn reportedly over a bar fight. Like he went full alpha.
That bad, huh?
Well, you can see that Bo Hopkins played the head of the Pharaohs, so you can see those two guys just getting in trouble.
So the studio wanted to shelve this because they couldn't make sense of it. Part of these stories could be told in any order. The crazy thing that sews it all together is the songs and that atmosphere, which is just such a wholly original thing to put wallpaper, wall to wall. And the fact that you go from one car to another, but the song continues, just changes to a different sound of a radio, is such an amazing trick to keep a very fragmented narrative, which is meant to be. It's meant to be a bunch of little skits. You know, this happens and it's all like, hey, remember when you had to try and buy booze when you were a kid? Or, hey, remember the makeout point you all had? I mean, this is Remember When the movie. Like, everything that's happening is like, remember Sock Ops? Remember Bill Haley and the Comets? To be so fragmented and so radical, it's like such an art film, except that it's so popular. You know, it wants to be loved. You know, it's not Zabriskie Point. You know, just trying to make you stop watching at any moment.
Well, there's a couple of very cool facts about that. Yes, it is. The term I learned was diegetic music, which means that it's music that the characters all hear and can react to. But it's not like the score of Goodfellas, which is mainly songs. And so who comes in to help make that happen? Walter Murch. He comes in, again, the genius incest of the 70s. He comes in to handle a lot of the sound design.
I mean, the sound design of THX is where Murch got started with him, too. That sound bath of that movie. But this is a different type of sound bath. And what they would do is they would set speakers in an alley and a recording setup in the same alley so it would catch the echo of the alley. So all the music you hear, none of it is taken from the record. It is all a record played in various environments to get different echoes to sound like it's out in the world. And that's why you get that sort of in a car sound when you go into one car, but that music's still playing to the guys that are standing around in the parking lot. Now it becomes bouncing off the walls. That they called that worldizing the music, and it's such a radical idea, and it's so effective.
And Easy Rider, I think, was one of the first to pass on a film score as well, so I think he kind of saw that and went, well, I can do it too, because I think once he wanted all the songs he could get, it was about $90,000, and he couldn't afford a composer anyway. So
yeah.
The original cut of the film was 3.5 hours till they cut it down. They had Verna Fields brought in by Universal. Of course, then Marcia and then George, uncredited, also worked on cutting the film down to the eventual, what was it, like an hour 52?
Yeah.
And you're right. Universal didn't know what to do with it. They wanted to do a huge re-edit. And Coppola offered to buy the film, just saying, "Give me it, I'll take it." And then when they won Best Picture, when he won Best Picture, the Universal kind of went, "Okay, do what you want, but we're releasing it as a TV movie." Like, every choice they made was really bad.
Yeah, and you wonder why Lucas hates the studio system so much. They were a San Francisco-based film unit, Zoetrope. He and Coppola and several others, and it was because they hated Hollywood.
And so fight, and eventually it's the greatest cost-to-profit ratio movie ever, one of them.
They were trying to convince the studio that this format would play without a radical re-edit. They did a test screening and brought in a bunch of, kids who were of the age group, Lucas's age group, that would really enjoy the nostalgia. And it went gangbusters. They walked out to talk to the Universal execs, and the Universal execs said, "You pack that audience with your friends. I don't believe this movie plays like that to a real audience." And Coppola pulls out his checkbook right there and he goes, I'll buy the movie from you right now." Such a Coppola move, man. Coppola's the big showman.
The Godfather. He is the Godfather. You've always called George Lucas punk rock, and it's tough when you watch Attack of the Clones for me to get on board with that. But this movie tells me exactly what you're talking about. And this guy is the guy who made Star Wars, which is why Star Wars is my favorite of the Star Wars movies.
Right. Well, Star Wars is the most radical of all the movies. Obviously, it's radical just the same way that American Graffiti and THX are. That's why he's such a genius. Is that three movies in a row? No filmmaker can beat that. No filmmaker can show that much range in their first 3 movies. Nobody. Yeah, it just from THX. Which, if I told you that was a Stanley Kubrick movie, you would have so few arguments with me as you watch that. Only when you get to the car chase at the end, you would go, "This feels a little more like a George Lucas movie."
And I'm going to admit to a fault I have made in the past, where I thought, they make a big deal about the dice that Han Solo has hanging from the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. It's like, why do we focus? By the time they get to the Solo movie, we're focused on these dice. I'm like, no other movie focused on these dice as much as the movie that's being nostalgic about them is focusing on the dice. And I thought it was because they were originally put in there because they were on Bob Falfa's car. And so they thought it would be fun to stick it in the cockpit of Han Solo's spaceship just because it's Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
No dice, turns out. The dice are in Steve's car. Yeah, Falfa's got a skull. So what that whole thing is like, it blew my mind, man. All the rage that's been in my head about that, man.
I'm glad you're chilling out, dude.
Sorry, still wasn't getting straight for a second there.
Yeah, I was waiting for you. We were having a party. You left the door open. We were waiting for you.
By the way, his introduction in the movie isn't necessarily his first time on screen. It's an off-screen roar of his engine when Toad and John are talking. I love that. They're just kind of talking, or Kurt and John are talking. And then you hear like, and they go, ooh. I mean, you gotta believe it's him, because as soon as you hear the, they hear, oh yeah, there's a new guy out there who wants to take you on. He's like, I'm not worried about him. But you don't even see the car go by. They're talking, they stay on him. You just hear the roar of the engine, and it's like a little foreboding of who's out there. I thought that was a really cool movie.
Harrison Ford, is the villain in this movie, and he's in the whole movie, even though you only see him several times in the movie, because he's constantly mentioned as this thing that's out there circling, waiting to take down Milner, who knows he can be taken down. And a lot of people will say, hey, Milner, some guy's looking for you. And then, of course, he makes his couple appearances and stuff. But that is a cool thing that, like, Harrison Ford is a presence throughout this entire movie.
Yeah.
He's this foreboding thing that's out there that's going to come get Milner,
Well, let's go down each of these actors. So,
what a cast, huh?
Ford's doing carpentry, but he took the part if he didn't have to cut his hair. I guess in the script, the guy had a flat top.
Oh.
He'd said, put the Stetson on me, and I'll take the part. Also, I need more money than I would make if I was doing carpentry, which the original offer was not.
Wow.
So then the offer was bumped up to $500 a week, and I guess he said, okay, I'll do it. And he's 30, so he's probably the oldest of the... I mean, Bo Hopkins looked pretty old, too, as the head of the Pharaohs, but...
But he's living Bo Hopkins years.
Yeah. So Ron Howard as the cool kid, which he plays very well, but after his sort of half nerdy Rishi Cunningham, it was interesting to go back and see how easily he pulled that off. It might have been a jolt for someone used to seeing Ron Howard be kind of cheesy on a TV show. For him to really play the ups and downs of a character like that who's struggling with his role in his hometown and in his future.
Happy Days was launched because of this movie, but everybody know him as Opie at this point.
Yeah, and I guess the casting director Fred Roos of Andy Griffith's show said, try this kid. And eventually, then, if you want your mind blown, he directs a movie about the actor who played Bob Falfa's Han Solo character, which was also created by the director of the movies he's in, Solo. So there you go.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Last week, we told you to watch the Quentin Tarantino talk about getting straight. If you want to watch something on YouTube this week, check out the rehearsal video, if you haven't yet, even Adam, between Ron Howard and Cindy Williams rehearsing their prom dance scene.
No way.
It's extraordinary. You're like, watch that and you're like, wow, if I were off to the side, I'd be like, well, we hired the right people. This is great. I mean, they got scripts while they have their arms around each other's shoulders and stuff, but they're
wow,
nailing it. And I'm like, wow, they were excellent. And they're excellent in the final cut.
I love that a scene where those two, aren't they the prom king and queen? Basically, they're given center dance.
Yeah, the cheerleader and the head of the student government.
And so everybody spreads out to let them dance, and they're all staring at them, and they're at their worst moment, having this total argument while pretending that everything's fine. Boy, that's a great scene.
And she's great. She's got the most pain of anybody in that situation because she clearly didn't want to see other people while they're in college.
Oh my God.
And he's struggling with trying to do the right thing, and that's a great scene.
I never realized how funny that opening scene was till I saw it with an audience where he says, maybe we should, while I'm off at college, maybe we should see other people. I think it'd be the best for the relationship. Like, what the hell?
So you got him and, of course, the Harrison Ford we're focused on, and then you're like, oh, we got all the hot rodders. You forget that Richard Dreyfuss is in this. Like
Richard Dreyfuss is in this movie.
He's a huge part, but sometimes I forget. I'm like, oh, that's right. He's, there's so much iconic stuff you might forget. And he's more or less discovered by Lucas here, too. He's done some TV, and he had that little bit part in The Graduate, but that's about it for film, really. And then he's given this huge anchoring part, and he killed it. He was great. And his Dreyfussisms are there already. He's talking to the Pharaohs, and he's like, like he's doing all the stuff that he does so well,
That's fantastic. And also, I love the thing that really blew my mind as well when I started studying filmmakers is the fact that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are friends. Like, hey, you should audition Richard Dreyfuss for Jaws. Or, I mean, certainly Spielberg is going to be paying attention to his friend George Lucas's movie and see Richard Dreyfuss. So that's, that's how we get his most famous role.
And that's really the next movie. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there may have, I'm not even sure there was one in between American Graffiti and Jaws. So he's booked to a part where you just expect him to like carry the lead of a movie, and then he just does that for the rest of his career. This is Kathleen Quinlan's screen debut. She was Peg, if you remember, the other couple that's awkwardly standing next to Steve and Laurie while they're arguing. Had a little scene with Cindy Williams in the bathroom. That's Kathleen Quinlan. Mark Hamill auditioned for the part, didn't get it. So this is a note to actors. Book the room. That's the phrase you always hear. Like, if you don't go in and book the movie, book the room. So the room calls you back for their next movie.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And Bob Balaban turned down the part that Charles Martin Smith eventually got Terry, and he apparently has regretted it his whole career. He had a pretty great career, too, but still.
But that's a good choice. That's good casting director. If your other choice is Bob Balaban, you're nailing that character in one way or another, right? Yeah. That show you how talented a casting director is. Like, our two choices are Charles Martin Smith and Bob Balaban. You're really good at casting.
Yeah, and that's Fred Roos, who I mentioned, I think, and he went on to become a producer himself for a bunch of Coppola stuff. So.
Yeah.
Del Close, did you spot the Del Close
I did not.
sighting?
I see that in the credits every time, and I mean to go back and check out Del Close, and I never have seen Del Close in this movie. Only in the credit, Del Close, guy at bar.
The line that stuck out to me where I said, that is him, was when Toad is vomiting, and he said something like, I've never seen anything like that.
Oh, that's Del?
Typical Del.
Oh, my God.
Side mouth. Yeah.
Del Close, for anybody that doesn't know, legendary improv instructor, comedian, founder of Improv Olympic, and probably...
At about that time.
It would not be the last time that Charles Martin Smith and Del Close were in a movie together. The guy tries to bribe him.
Two more things about the cast. Mackenzie Phillips. Gary Kurtz had to become her legal guardian just to get her in the film.
What?
Because she was 12.
Wow.
So in order to ensure that everything went well and there was somebody on the set who was her
legal guardian
there for her, he just said, I'm there all the time, I'll do it. I guess.
Never. Didn't she have some drug problems later on as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, Gary, you could have done better.
No, he couldn't be your dad forever, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And then Wolfman Jack, a lot of those phone calls were real on-air calls that he took with people, except for the guy on the line for Pinky's Pizza, the little prank phone call that they listened to in the car while they're on the way to the sock hop. That's George Lucas.
Oh, is it? Oh, I got to listen to that back now. I never knew that little Easter egg there.
And then, of course, at the end of the movie, it's sad, right? Just the where are they now?
Oh, this is one of the radical things that the movie does. Is here we are. It's, what are we saying? Good night is playing. It's time to go. Mm-hmm. He boards the plane, and here's this movie that has since Rock Around the Clock starts the movie out. There has not been a moment where there's not been music playing. For the first time in an hour 52 minutes.
Wow, you're right.
The music fades out, and it's awkward. It's weird. And they even go to the plane. He's holding a radio and wants to get another worldized version of the song. We now have it differently than we did on the ground. But for the first time in the movie, we hear silence, and that's when Milner killed in Vietnam comes up as the first.
Or killed by a drunk driver.
Oh, killed by a drunk driver.
And then Toad.
The order of those is fascinating because the first one, killed by a drunk driver, he wasn't racing. He stopped racing. He did the right thing. Then the second one is Vietnam. You're like, oh my God, we're like, that brings this movie we've spent not being in 1969, the entire movie, not being in 1973. Suddenly we're right back in 1973 with that second one. Milner dies in an auto accident. Toad dies in Vietnam. And then Steve becomes an insurance agent in Modesto. And for George Lucas, those are equivalent deaths. That's why he had to get the hell out of there.
You're right.
So really, that is a real joke that the third one mentioned is Steve becomes an insurance agent in Modesto. And, Richard Dreyfuss made out okay.
People kind of said, "Ooh, did he go to Canada because of the war?" That's been a lot of discussion, And of course, the big rumor is that did he go on and write "Stand by Me" because he's the author of that, reflecting on even before the '60s, which of course I don't think Stephen King had in mind. But casting Dreyfuss, people go, "Ooh, what's going on there?" And then another interesting footnote to that is John's death was changed to later so he could then be in the sequel.
Oh!
There was a re-release where I think it was he died in 64. Make it 67 because I think they had
For
him
more American Graffiti?
in the sequel. We'll find out. We'll find out in a few
okay.
movies.
Yeah. Well, I'll allow that.
So then the aftermath is Coppola still regrets not financing the whole film. He would have made $30 million off of it if he just financed the whole thing, and that would be the equivalent of $173 million today. Oof. It becomes the 43rd highest grossing film of all time if you add in inflation. And Lucas becomes a millionaire, just like that, in the realm of $4 million, and devotes $300,000 of it to making Star Wars.
Wow.
Everybody loves it except Pauline Kael. But that's natural, right?
I guess so. Yeah. People seem to like how I haven't read a ton of Pauline Kael, but people seem to enjoy how she doesn't like things, though. I guess I'm sure it's well said whatever she said about Graffiti.
Well, she said that Lucas was chauvinist because he didn't give us the update on any of the women in those postscripts.
She's not wrong.
And then, of course, all the studio nonsense we mentioned. It goes on to be nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Director. So all his fighting paid off. It didn't win any, unfortunately, but a Best Story.
I didn't even know it was nominated.
Yeah,
this is news to me.
Yeah, it was beaten by The Sting, but nominated alongside Cries and Whispers and
it should be
The Exorcist. So yeah, and then the script, Best Story and Screenplay based on factual material or material not previously produced or published. That eventually became Best Original Screenplay. You can see why. Best Supporting Actress, Candy Clark for Debbie, the girl that Toad ends up with, is
really
Best Supporting Actress. I thought that was interesting. Just a little sort of sidelined comedic character.
Yeah.
And she got an Oscar nod.
She does a great job. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty cool recognition.
And Best Film Editing for Verna Fields and Marsha Lucas.
It earns that because the film also knows when not to edit. It never feels rushed, and even though it tells all these different stories.
One thing Lucas had to sacrifice in changing it so many times was ABCD format. Like tell story A, tell story B, tell a little C, tell a little D. Go back to A, B, C, D, and just keep repeating that. But it kind of had to get jumbled all over the place eventually with how much they had to do and how they went through the various cuts. I guess.
Well, it seems like an impossible film to edit because some of these things could kind of go anywhere, and yet they bring everyone back together. Everyone gets their lesson. Everyone progresses finds their truth. Throughout the course of the night, the events make all of them better people, and it brings them back together remarkably. Like suddenly in this movie, no matter how far afield we've gone, and for that at some point they all end up back at Mel's, and you're like, oh, we're all back at Mel's. Wow, and it just really feels complete. The whole evening.
Yeah, I thought Mel's was built out of American Graffiti. No, it was around since the 40s. They just found a Mel's to shoot at.
Is that the case?
That's the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
I always thought that was made up for the movie and that's a themed diner that we're seeing in LA.
It's themed now because they're proud of it. But
sure.
At the time, it was just a series of these type of drive-in places. And they shot at one. And that one that they shot at is gone. But there's still a handful, obviously 3 here in LA.
I mean, also talk about the nostalgia. I don't think the roller skating waitresses were still around even in 73. That was probably something that was going away as of 63.
And for all that effort, they did win Best Film, Comedy or Musical at the Golden Globes. So they just didn't win the Oscar. And in 95, the Library of Congress selects it for film preservation in the National Film Registry. I mean, even just watching it on HBO Max is a great looking print, great sound.
Beautiful.
Great sound. Modesto dedicates a statue to Lucas at George Lucas Plaza in 1997.
Okay.
Nods to the movie show up in Attack of the Clones. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I think when Anakin and Obi-Wan had their yellow airspeeder, that's a nod to John Milner's Deuce Coupe.
Of course.
And Dex's Diner is also not unlike Mel's.
Right. Yes. A 50s themed diner in space. One other reference. Did you catch a reference that The Mandalorian makes to American Graffiti? This blew my mind.
No.
When you're going steady with someone, if you're a rat rodder like Milner, you give them your gear shifter knob.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which is what he gives Grogu. And I mean, that must have tickled George Lucas to no end when he saw that, because he knows that, that was the thing. Mandalorian and Grogu are going steady. But that's a Graffiti reference. I mean, and
Grogu really is like the 12-year-old girl that the Mandalorian just wants out of his car.
It is. The relationship is similar. It tracks. Viewing all movies Harrison Ford's in now as a Harrison Ford movie is really cool in American Graffiti because he chews up every moment on screen, and it just makes me so happy. All of his nods, he kicks that cowboy cap up. Oh my God. Visual consultant, Haskell Wexler. If I were to say, what scene do you think Haskell Wexler shot? Would it by any chance be when the movie turns into Days of Heaven at the end after the car crash at the sunrise? Those are some of the most beautiful shots in cinema, and they're so different from everything else. Gorgeous ending shots. It's got to be Haskell Wexler. That's why they couldn't pay him as a DP because he's a big, expensive DP, but he's... I'm sure there's a whole story about how Wexler ended up working on this, but... That
opening shot's pretty great, too. You'll take for granted the shot of just Mel's unless you start looking at the sky and how everything is in place in that shot.
Beautiful, right?
But what I read was he couldn't afford a cinematographer on the low budget, so he just had the 2 camera ops from THX, I believe, join him in this sort of, and then with Lucas, like the 3 of us will figure it out. And then he said, well, I just need to bring in hashtag Genius Incest, and Wexler will come in and help me with the visual stylings of the movie. But how does the movie stack up against the Ford definitive list of essentials? Now, it's interesting because he doesn't have righteous anger. He doesn't have any kind of anger. He's just sure and confident that he's going to win this drag race. Does he point? No. Does he smile and charm? Yes, he does smile and charm. Bob Falfa's got that in spades. He's cool as a cucumber and just sure he's going to win this match. But then that's about it. So it doesn't check off much. Yet the smile and charm part of Harrison Ford is operating at like a 10. So how Harrison Ford is he in this?
He gets to be a kind of a lover boy in this one. You know, like he's got a girl in his car, and that's a thing, you know.
Sings her a song?
Sings her a song, you know.
Great scene.
So, you know, it's not one of the things we're counting. There's no punches, there's none of the stuff like that. But he is a lover boy. He's a hottie.
So we get that. Unfortunately, I don't think we get another punch to add to the Harrison Ford punch count that we've been tallying since the beginning of this, which remains at 1. Jack Lemmon.
He is shirtless in this at the end. They pull him out of the car and his shirt's open. So shirtless Harrison Ford. I know we're not taking account on that. We're not counting.
I don't know if that's a definitive, but it's something.
It's not definitive. It's just a...
You can make an argument. Well, that wraps American Graffiti. So much to say about that one, and if you have anything to say yourself about this legendary film, chime in at the Movie Guys everywhere on social media, and of course at themovieguys.net.
And because the 70s couldn't get enough Cindy Williams and Harrison Ford, they'll both be back in next week's movie as we return to talk about Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation.
I'd watch that again if I got the chance.
Some enchanted evening, you will see a stranger. You will see a stranger across a crowded room. And suddenly you'll know that she is the one.